Well, thank you all for coming tonight, and it's just great to see so many of you here. And so I'm hopefully going to make a successful pitch that Philadelphia can be a biophilic city, already is, and really ought to be a leader in this area, and already is, and really ought to be part of this Biophilic Cities network. So that's essentially my message. And I do have a few slides. So, you know, my position, my point is to maybe emphasize a little bit more the urban scale of things. And I am an urban planner, a city planner by training, and so we're thinking about all the ways that cities can, in fact, be sustainable, and they have to be, of course. We know we are in the age of cities, and we've passed that 50% mark of the global population living in cities on the way to 70 or 80 or whatever it ends up being. And so when we think about the best hope we have for creating the conditions of a sustainable life, it's an urban setting. It has to be. We're not going to turn that around. And most of us who argue for sustainable cities are arguing for compact, dense, walkable sorts of cities. So thus the challenge, though, is how do we have that compactness, that density, that we know that we need to support public transit and walking and energy efficient buildings and all the things that we know we need to do to reduce our ecological footprints. But also have that contact with nature that Bill talks so compellingly about. We are a species that needs that connection. And so thus the concept of biophilia has really emerged as something really compelling for us in city planning as a way of thinking about this. Some of this repeats what Bill's talked about. This is the definition we do often refer to. And we have to give a lot of credit to Ed Wilson for helping to kind of popularize this idea. The essential insight that we have, lived only a tiny little bit of our evolutionary history inside buildings and in cities. So we're carrying with us this ancient brain, and we've got to design and plan cities with that, not only with that in mind, but really at the core of what we do. So that's essentially what a biophilic city is. Helena talked about the network. This started actually at UVA about 4 or 5 years ago. We started something called the Biophilic Cities Project. And we had a couple of years of funding from the Summit Foundation, a Washington, D.C. foundation. And they've just recently given us some additional money to roll out the network. But the first couple of years of this work had mostly to do with exploring what does it mean to be a biophilic city? What are the different ways that might manifest at an urban scale? And what cities around the US and around the world already seem to have those qualities? So that's a lot of what we did in the first couple of years. About a year and a half ago, we launched. We had a conference actually in Charlottesville where we brought all of our 10 representatives from our 10 partner cities, these first 10 that sort of joined with us in exploring what this idea of a biophilic city is, brought them to Charlottesville. And Helena and Bill and others in the room here actually were at that event. And we called it a launch event because we were also launching this new global network of biophilic cities. And that's essentially what I want to talk to you about. Here are some images. This is the Biophilic Cities webpage. May 1st, we will be unveiling a whole new webpage, a whole new design. But we've had a blog, we have an e-newsletter. Anybody who'd like to give me their email, I'm happy to add you to our email list, and you'll get the next email. The next e-newsletter is about dark sky in nature in the city as we think about the universe. And so we've had blog, we've had a number of other things that we've been doing. By the way, these are images on the very last day of our launch event. We took all the participants outside and they signed a Biophilic Cities pledge, a sort of a publisher's clearinghouse sort of sized thing on the downtown mall, a pedestrian mall, and that's Lena Chan, who's the director of the National Biodiversity Center in Singapore. Singapore's been one of our partner cities from the beginning. So it's been interesting to see how this idea of a biophilic city seems to resonate. And I am my title actually is Professor of Sustainable Communities, so I'm not allowed to say bad things about the concept of sustainability. But I must admit that sometimes a lot of times folks don't get very excited about that word, sustainable, and all the things that we know we need to be doing. But as important, perhaps more important, is imagining the kinds of places we want to live. And putting forward a sort of positive image of what that city could be like.
Tim, I'm not an architect, which probably accounts for my question. When I think of Singapore, and when I read something called the Straits Times online, which is a
wow,
they have these incredible high-rises in a very small footprint.
Yes.
I just can't.
How does that work?
Even under Mr. Q or Lee or whoever, the Grand Major Domo there was passed away. It doesn't look to me like that's the kind of a place where I dream of forests and waterfalls.
Well, hold on. I'm going to tell you about Singapore.
Cities over in Japan.
Yeah. Well, Singapore, I'll try to convince you of this, and I have 2 or 3 slides a little bit later. I'm going to kind of give you a really quick survey of what our partner cities are up to, and I'll show you some imagery and tell you a little bit about their Biophilic Cities policies. But it's really quite a positive story, I would argue. So these are images from Birmingham in the UK. Birmingham has been one of our 10 partner cities and the second largest city in the UK. And these are images from the last spring, about a year ago exactly. And it's been very interesting to see how in that city, which if you live in the UK, Birmingham is still sort of known as that I shouldn't say ugly, but that kind of industrial. Yeah, and I had almost an argument with a Heathrow immigration person about Birmingham, and he had a hard time. They have trees in Birmingham, and anyway, this is the Lord Mayor on the upper right image, and he is declaring. He's actually making a toast, and they are declaring and have declared that they are going to be the first biophilic city in the UK. So we had a series of big events there last April. We got a very nice story in The Guardian about it. And I've been getting, shortly after this event, emails from just about every other city in the UK, it seemed like, wanting to know how they could be part of the network and be a biophilic city as well. Very interesting. It's touching a chord. We do, actually May 1st, we'll be unveiling a new set of protocols, a new set of expectations for the new cities joining the network. I won't go through this. It'll all be online, but we've grappled with the sort of issue, do we want to be another certification? We can't be another U.S. Green Building Council. We're kind of modeling our network after Tree City, Bird City, something like that, where we are going to expect certain things, but we're not going to be certifying Birmingham or anywhere else as a biophilic city. It will mean different things in different places, and cities will have a lot of flexibility in terms of envisioning the future and defining the ways in which nature plays a role. But there will be some basic things that they'll have to do, and one of the things that all cities will need to do is have some form of official city council adopted resolution or proclamation stating their intention to be part of the network and to aspiring to be a biophilic city. And so, and that's really interesting because we've just this week, I'm going to skip ahead. We've got fledgling groups of biophilic advocates in cities all over the place, in a number of American cities. And just on Tuesday, today is Thursday, right? 2 days ago, the DC City Council adopted a Biophilic Cities resolution. Yay. And it was championed by several of our colleagues, Stella Tarnay in particular, but also John Hadidian, Chief Scientist of the Humane Society of the U.S., and it's a major step. And it's remarkable, again, how this idea is resonating, and it's laying a platform for, Washington is already in many ways biophilic, but it has lots of challenges. And so pulling groups together who haven't really worked together and haven't really been talking to each other, like the Humane Society, City Wildlife, Wildlife Rehabilitation center. The DC Environmental Network actually is the sort of convening group for this fledgling. Here, just some images from some of the meetings that we've been having. So that's really impressive. And Tommy Wells, the new director of the DC Department of Environment, was quoted in the Washington Post about 2 weeks ago, referencing the biophilic movement. I mean, this is just amazing. So this is all really good and bodes well for what's happening. So Bill has told you a lot about the reasons for why we want to advance this agenda, and there are many, of course, and the special qualities that nature, special things that nature does for us, reducing that long-term chronic stress. So many of our health problems today are connected in one way or another with that. We believe, we know that nature creates the conditions for social relationships, and those social connections and social relationships, social capital, help to make us healthier as well. There's a lot of evidence now that in the presence of nature, we score more highly on creativity tests and indices, that we're more likely to be generous in the presence of nature, evidence coming out of experimental psychology. New economic study that shows that we're more likely to think longer term if we have nature around us. So if we're interested in imagining sustainable, resilient cities and people, families, organizations that will help move in that direction, nature has to be there. I talk a lot about the importance of cities of awe and the value of wonder and wonder and amazement in our lives, and nature is not the only thing that can provide that, but is uniquely able to generate that reaction in us. And then biophilic cities are resilient cities. So virtually everything that you can imagine that we could do to make a city more natureful will help that city to become more resilient, whether it's in addressing long-term urban heat or stormwater management or food production, as Bill's discussing. All those things are really important for us to kind of help push along. So multiple reasons for thinking about biophilic cities. I'm not actually deleted some slides, and Bill very nicely went through a lot of the evidence on. I couldn't delete forest bathing just because I love mentioning it every time I speak about this, and the concept of walking through a forest or natural area with the dappled lights and the colors and the sounds of that nature. It's not surprising at all that our stress hormone levels would have gone down, that experience would help boost our immune system. It makes a lot of sense. So usually when that term gets introduced into a conference or a presentation, people end up using it later and talking about the forest bathing, and on that green roof. I want to go green roof forest bathing, or I want to do, it ends up having another life. So as I've said, a lot of what we've done in the first several years of this project and network is thinking about the ways that a city could be biophilic. What does that mean? And so there are different ways that we could talk about it, different ways that we could express it. We very often express it in a kind of narrative way. Biophilic cities are cities that place nature at the heart of their design and planning. It's not an afterthought. It's a central design principle. Cities that care about, actively protect, restore, celebrate nature, biodiversity, and wildness in and around them. Cities that recognize the profound power that nature has to make us healthier, happier, and to help us lead more meaningful lives. Cities that seek through many means to foster deep connections to the natural world. So that connection, that connectedness is a really important part of this. It's interesting, several of our partner cities have redefined the vision they have for themselves, in a sense, by imagining an urban environment that is more nature immersive. And this is an interesting way to think about it. Singapore, you mentioned Singapore, and Singapore not long ago changed its city motto from Singapore, a garden city, to Singapore, a city in a garden. And that seems like a small change, but it's actually quite profound. This notion that we want to live, in a garden, and kind of shift away. Maybe we need parks in cities, of course, but the thought that you have to walk a block or 2 or 5 to get to the park, that the nature's there. Why don't we imagine that we live in the park? Why do we have to visit the park? Why do we have to visit the garden? Let's imagine the city as the garden, and that's essentially what Singapore has been doing, or sitting in a forest. Wellington, New Zealand is another of our partner cities, and that's sort of how they're defining their city. So we're thinking about metrics, and how might you track and monitor and evaluate a biophilic city as it changes and grows over time. And there are different ways of judging progress, I would say. So here are 2 sort of different ways. And the images on the left, it's Mayor of St. Louis, Mayor Slay, and he's holding up a placard that talks about a very interesting program they have in the city called Milkweeds for Monarchs. It's Catherine Warner to his right. On the left, the sustainability director for the city, and she came to our launch event in Charlottesville, actually. Very interesting. So the Mayor Slay in St. Louis has declared that they will be planting 250 butterfly gardens in the city by a certain date. Mayors promise lots of things, right? They're not often promising, butterfly gardens.
They're often chasing butterflies.
Maybe they are, and that would be good, I suppose. But that's impressive. So could we measure a biophilic city by the presence or absence of butterflies, the prospect that wherever you live in that city, you might have butterflies around you. The image on the right is actually from Wellington, New Zealand. They have a quite amazing story of a large nature preserve in the middle of the city called Zealandia, and they've built a predator-proof fence around it, the goal being to allow space for native species of birds to repopulate. They've been heavily decimated by introduced species in that country, as many of you probably know. And so the tagline of Zealandia is bringing back birdsong to Wellington. Birdsong. Could we measure progress in a city by whether you're hearing birds? Birdsong? Shouldn't it be your right to live in a neighborhood where you hear birds? Birdsong as a measure of the success. And that's actually what's happened. The neighborhoods surrounding Zealandia, as the birds have grown in number and repopulate those spaces, there's birdsong in Wellington now, and it's quite amazing. So that's a little bit different, and perhaps a little bit different of a kind of metric when we think about biophilic cities. Lots of other ways that we could define a biophilic city. We could talk more specifically about its physical form and its physical design principles. This is an image of Helsinki and the green spaces network there. Multiple levels of green space, interconnected, kind of hierarchical. The idea that you ought to be able to walk out your door, have nature all around you, and then move to progressively larger nature as you move from your office or home. And that's essentially what you can do in Helsinki. Go from a very dense urban core all the way out to old growth forests at the edge of that city. So room or rooftop to region or bioregion and all of the scales in between. So we should think of, again, going back to the city as a garden, all of the opportunities that we have to insert and grow nature. So there are, of course, lots of different ways of defining nature, and nature to a certain degree is a social construct, right? So we, in the Biophilic Cities Project, have been pretty open about what constitutes nature. And obviously a lot of it is human-designed nature. And so one of the great pleasures of this project is that I get emails from people working all over the world, and they are telling me what they're working on, and things that people and places I don't know much about. So one day, I got a very energetic email from a fellow in Spain, a fellow named Marc Granion, a designer, an activist, and gardener who has developed an interesting system, a technology for installing green rooftops on municipal buses. And there are a couple of cities in Spain now where these buses are in operation. It's quite interesting. It's a real picture. And so, you know, we could be really creative about where nature, lots of opportunities, and almost limitless in a way, if we imagine that city as a garden. So for us, though, it's not just the presence or absence of nature, it's how engaged we are in that nature. So when we think about a biophilic city, it's a city where residents spend time outside. It's a city where citizens care about nature. It's a city where you can look at the budget, you can look at the municipal priorities and see that nature is important in all of its forms. So it's engagement and participation, activity patterns, lifestyle. How many species, native species of flora and fauna can citizens identify, recognize, for example? How much do they know about that nature and how much do they care about it? This idea of having infusing a culture of curiosity. We can have a lot of nature around us, but we may not care about it. We may not be open to seeing it even. And that's an important dimension of what a biophilic city is. It's the spirit of the city. We're grappling a little bit with how to measure some of these things, but it's an important thing to think about and talk about. So we are working on metrics, and I won't go through this. There's more on the webpage. It's, by the way, www.biophiliccities.org. I don't think I said that before. And so one of the things that we'll see with the network is different cities will be using different metrics, and it'll be interesting to compare and contrast what cities measure. So Bill asked the question, or pondered the question, how much nature do we need? I think I get my 5 minutes, but I'm hoping for more. And I'm hopeful that you all will get more than 5 minutes, but it is an interesting question to ponder. Is there some kind of minimum daily requirement of nature? And this is something that many of our colleagues, Rich Louvre and others, who talk about vitamin N, or lots of different ways that this has been expressed. And I don't know what that minimum is, but I think there is one. And it's interesting to think about this in terms of dosages, as Bill talked about, or in terms of servings. We've adopted you recall the food pyramid? The USDA now, it's a little irritating. They've gone to plates, and they've moved away from so they're talking, in terms of healthy plates of food. I like the pyramid idea. So the food pyramid, remember this idea of kind of guiding our food choices by that pyramidal structure, the things at the top that may be good for you in small quantities, but you don't want to build your diet around them. The things at that base of the pyramid are things that should make up the bulk of your diet, vegetables and fruits. So we've been talking a lot about what makes up the urban nature diets, and that's kind of an interesting way for us to frame this. So things at the top of that pyramid are really more immersive experiences. You may go off to a Costa Rican rainforest and have a really, an amazing, intensive experience. Well, we can't really afford as a planet for everyone to do that, right? The energy footprint is too great. So we need to think about what's at the base of that pyramid. What constitutes the everyday nature, the nature that will be integrated into your neighborhood or around you in your neighborhood? And so we're not quite sure what it is. We put forth our own nature pyramid, and then some of our partner cities, this is one actually the city of Wellington did, they liked the idea so much they decided to make up their own version with their own native species and things, projects and green elements that made sense for them. But it's an interesting question if you carry the analogy forward and think about, well, what the urban nature diet, what's even an urban, a serving of urban nature? What is that, as Bill suggests, is that a bird? Is it a bird song? Is it hearing 2 birds, 3 birds, seeing 3 birds and a green roof? 2 green roofs, a tree, 4 trees, a green roof, and 3 birds? What constitutes, we don't know exactly, but I'm being a little silly, but there is a cumulative impact, of course, of having all of that nature back to the idea of a city as a garden. So I sometimes get the question, is the urban nature diet, is it kind of like the Mediterranean diet? It kind of depends on what city you're in and what part of the world you're in, and it does, obviously. So the things that we want to do, the things that might make up the urban nature diet in Phoenix are different than the things that will work here in Philadelphia. So this is a challenge. What would the Philadelphia urban nature diet, what would the nature pyramid look like for Philadelphia? And you know, what makes up that foundation? Okay, I'm fast running out of time. I will second Bill's comment about the multi-sensory nature of this, and it certainly applies at a city level as well. And we've been especially interested in sound and developing sound maps and sound inventories of sound. And our last, time before last e-newsletter was all about sounds and natural soundscapes in cities. We had a fantastic interview with Bernie Krause, who's kind of well known for his recordings of natural soundscapes around the world. And we do need to think about how we shift our mindset and the things that we hear. This is a fantastic quote. Val Plumwood, she's deceased now, but a well-known ecofeminist from Australia, talked about kind of rethinking or reimagining sound as voices. So that you hear those bird songs and recognize that we're co-inhabiting those urban spaces with other forms of life, including birds. So the remaining slides I think that I have are just a quick little survey of what our partner cities are doing. One of them is Vitoria-Gasteiz, the capital of the Basque Country in Spain, and this is the head of the Environment Department, Luisa Rive, and they are well known for their green ring that circles the city. It's a very compact, walkable city. You're never very far from that green ring, and much of it is restored landscape and a very large wetland that was a municipal airport that's been converted to a Ramsar wetland, actually. But now they developed a plan for what they call the interior green ring, which is to bring that nature through particular corridors and through the old city. And in the first corridor, they're daylighting a stream, bringing that stream back to the surface in this very dense urban environment. Quite impressive. Oslo has been a city that we've studied for a long time. And impressive for many reasons. Two-thirds of the city is in protected forest. The other third is densifying, which is interesting. They also have one of the most impressive urban trail networks of any city. This is one portion of it on the left, just a few hundred meters actually from pretty dense urban development. The latest chapter is that they've adopted a green plan that aspires to restore and bring back to the surface the 10 major rivers that run through the city that connect the forest and the fjord. It's a very ambitious green agenda in an already very natural sort of city. Portland, Oregon has been one of our partner cities, a fantastic story about sustainable stormwater. Many of you know about it. They now have more than 1,400 green streets. This is Linda Dobson, who until recently was headed their sustainable stormwater program. That, by the way, is an apartment complex where it collects all the water that falls on it is collected, kept on site, and circulated through a series of runnels and water art. And we're told that residents come out when it rains to listen to the rain. So here are some of the green streets that collect these portions of roadways and sidewalks that are essentially bioswales. San Francisco has been a partner city as well. They have, as many of you know, pioneered the idea of smaller parks, parklets, and taking small spaces in the city and reconfiguring them for nature. These are images from Street Parks, which is a program where they allow neighborhoods to take over the median strips for roads. And some fantastic stories like this one, La Playa Park. It's become this place for nature and a community gathering spot, but really quite impressive. You know about parklets probably, the idea of taking 2 or 3 on-street parking spaces, converting them to parks. San Francisco has really pioneered that, and they now have a new permitting process for it. Jane Martin, who's an architect who's been a big supporter of our project, and she has designed the first residential parklet in the city, which you see here. which is quite green and even includes a vegetative dinosaur that goes by the name Trixie. So interesting, a number of cities in our network that have some form of green alley program, and San Francisco is actually incorporating what they call living alleys, designating living alleys in their district plans, and slowly working towards greening them. That was an image of one of the first. Montreal has been a partner city, and they've had a long-standing green alleyway program where basically these are alleys that served as access points for delivery of coal, not needed for that any longer, and so the neighborhoods are able to close them off to traffic and plant them and plant gardens. Really quite remarkable. So Singapore, I have two more cities I just want to quickly talk about. Singapore is an impressive story in many ways, not the least of which because of its longstanding prime minister who had a special interest in trees and gardens. But it's quite impressive. A city and a country that has grown in population by 1.5 million. At the same time, the percentage of green cover has gone up, not down, but up. So massive tree planting and landscaping requirements, the idea of having closed canopies that cover roads, really pioneering in that way. This is an interesting system of what they call park connectors that serve as pathways and trails that connect points of population with existing larger parks. That's quite a story, and actually a lot of it happens. Actually, Bill, the bridge you showed is part of this section of the park's connector. But just about everything they build, they see as an opportunity to integrate new nature. And that's really important. And by the way, I failed to say this. I skipped over a couple of slides in the beginning, but one of the things we've been doing is making films about each of our partner cities. So there is a 45-minute film about Singapore, and you can find it on YouTube. So if you just Google Singapore, a Biophilic city, you will find it, and there are chapters about each of these major programs. So there's a chapter actually about the KTPH, this most biophilic health facility I've ever seen. So it's a program, a design program given to the architects, as the CEO says, we want you to design a building that when you design a hospital, that when you register, you come into that hospital, your heart rate goes down, your blood pressure goes down. That's not the usual reaction, of course, in that very stressful time. And not only that, we want it to be restorative. So we're going to judge it by how much it enhances nature and how many species of birds and butterflies we count on site. And they have a whole wall devoted to monitoring and counting those butterflies and birds. So very interesting. And on one of the rooftops of one of the buildings, there's a small urban farm that many patients enjoy watching, actually, to build on the point Bill made, including 140 fruit trees. So they are producing some food as well. But it's been very interesting to see how what's happened on the policy and planning level. So there is something called the Singapore Landscape Replacement Policy. So if you build a new high-rise building in Singapore now, you will be subject to this. And the minimum requirement is that you basically replace the land area that you've taken by building the building, the footprint of the building, and you include at least as much area in new green elements in the vertical realm. So Singapore is really pioneering nature in the vertical realm. And it's been very interesting. So this is a new, Park Royal, a new hotel, and they have replaced the ground area by 215%. So they have more than doubled what they were required to, and actually more area in the vertical realm of this building than the traditional park across the street. So,
of course, Mr. Vliet did anything he wanted to for many years now. His son's on the show. Is there zoning or there regulations?
Oh yes.
Setting all. Are there benefits if you do double the amount of the planted?
Well, this is a regulation, but what's interesting is that
a benefit if you do
there are a suite of policies, and so the government subsidizes the installation of green features. That's one thing. I skipped over a slide about a school, and green wall at a school, a number of projects that get subsidies for the installation of green things because they're providing lots of ecosystem services for the city, and they're helping to create that garden. There's also a lot of kind of commercial. It's interesting. There's a friendly competition between building owners now to see which one can. There's an annual Skyrise Greening Award, in fact, and there's a Skyrise Greening division within the city's natural or nature parks board. So they're even kind of reorganizing their government in a way that emphasizes nature at every level. It's really interesting. Okay, I need to stop, but my last city is Wellington, New Zealand, and I'm often talking these days about water, often oceans and kind of marine environments, and the nature. This more holistic way of thinking about nature in cities, it has special meaning for cities that are coastal cities, I would argue. And so one of the cool things that Wellington has done, there's a long history of green belts in Wellington, and in fact a town belt that goes back to the original 1850s plan for the city. And now they have outer green belts that connect with the inner green belt, and it's quite a remarkable terrestrial land conservation story in that city. But they recognize that they occupy a peninsula, and the greater amount of biodiversity actually is in the water, is in the marine environment around them. And so this fellow, Steve Journay, who's, because of this photograph, is now affectionately known as Starfish Steve. He dives every day in the Wellington Harbor. And he's just published a book about marine life of the Wellington Harbor. And orcas come into the harbor, and it's really a remarkable place. And so they're imagining the expansion of their nature system to include blue belts, and imagining all of the spaces that, beyond the waters, the land edge, and reimagining their city really as a more holistic land-sea context for nature. And that's really what we have to do in marine and coastal environments. And so that's a remarkable story, and I know that we will have more remarkable stories to tell as the network expands. And so just to conclude, lots of reasons to be part of this new network. It's quite exciting, and in the US, I mentioned Washington, but there 2-3 weeks ago, we had a major meeting in Denver. St. Louis is interested, a nascent group in Pittsburgh. So in a number of cities and a number of places, this idea seems to be resonating. It seems to be the time. And so we'd love to have Philadelphia and you all involved in this network. And Helena, we wanted to have a conversation about that and the ways in which maybe Philadelphia already is biophilic, and the ways that it could aspire to even more nature. So I will stop there. Help us grow the Biophilic Cities network. Take a look at the webpage. Send me your email or join online, and hopefully be part of the movement, as Tommy Wells in DC has said. So I'll stop there. Thank you for coming.